Welcome back to my vessel of light. Tonight we sit with a story about paperwork and breath, a town that ended a life on paper, and a woman who began again by simply arriving. In a coastal registry office, a clerk stamped a certificate with calm precision. A storm had passed. A boat was missing. The ledger received a new line. Alara Mora declared deceased at dawn. Across the bay, a clinic woke to soft machines and a woman with salt in her hair. No wallet, no phone, a wristband with numbers, and a name returning slowly like morning. Days later, Alara stepped back into town. The air smelled like rope and oranges. The market chattered, her feet knew the bricks. Her chest remembered the hill, but her name did not open doors. Her bank card failed without explanation. Her phone plan returned to silence. Her mailbox wore a new lock. The system tidied her life in her absence. Efficient, polite, and very wrong. Alara walked to the registry with the old green doors. The clerk behind the glass lifted his head. His badge read Mikhail Cruz. His expression moved from routine to awe and then to work. He asked for details without ceremony. Storms understand facts. He checked entries and tides. He found her files sealed, complete with condolence notes, memorial permit, and a stamped death certificate numbered precisely. Alara listened and felt steadiness. She had survived a storm. She could survive a line. She placed the clinic bracelet on the counter like quiet evidence of breath and time. Mateo called supervisors, supervisors called legal, legal called policy. Policy suggested appointments. Alara waited. The clock clicked like a measured ocean. She practiced arriving to each minute before it arrived to her. By afternoon, the temporary file opened like a window. The system allowed a narrow path back to living. Provisionally alive, pending signatures. Alara smiled at the phrase and chose to be more than pending. On the walk home, she passed the square where candles still clustered around her photograph. Rain had wrinkled the paper. A child drew a halo that looked more like a small sun. Alara stood and let the sight teach her something. People had grieved a version who hurried and postponed rest. That version was declared dead, perhaps not unfairly, perhaps usefully. A neighbor named Innes approached with cautious joy and careful arms. They spoke like people learning new grammar. Grief and relief share vocabulary. Both require water, patience, and windows open to ordinary air. That evening, Alara borrowed a spare room. The linen smelled of lavender. She wrote 3 lines on a card: water before decisions, daylight before headlines, kindness before speed. She tucked the card under the glass. Morning brought forms, signatures, and a new photograph for identification. Alara looked into the camera and allowed stillness. The clerk said hold, she held. The lens captured someone planning to keep herself. She visited the clinic and thanked the nurse who read her pulse like a map. The nurse placed the intake note in her hand, another small anchor for the administrative sea. On the pier, the fisherman who taught her knots raised a hand. He said nothing loud. Eyes do enough. Alara breathed with the ropes and felt the old language return kindly. At midday, she reached her building with the new mailbox lock. The landlord arrived with a tin of spare keys and a voice soft from practice. Doors can forgive, and records can learn. Inside, the apartment held the careful dust of interrupted sentences. Plants tilted toward remembered sun. On the table, a calendar still wore the storm date. Alara opened windows and invited the day. She gathered what survived. A shell from Ola Branca, a letter half written, a list of later had always been heavy. She folded the list smaller and placed it near water. At the registry, Mateo prepared the reinstatement packet with steady hands. He explained like a bridge. 2 witnesses. Sworn statement, hearing date, and final stamp. Living again by public record. Alara asked if the system would remember delay as failure. Mateo shook his head gently. The file would remember survival, and the hearing would remember her name pronounced clearly without hurry. While waiting, she walked to the Harbor Museum and found names etched in brass. She traced letters of those who never returned. Respect requires accuracy. Love requires arrival. Both require breath. At sunset, she visited the square and sat near the weathered photograph. People still left flowers and notes. Alara did not remove them. Memorials can teach the living how to remain. The hearing arrived like a Monday. Fluorescent lights and careful chairs. A magistrate with kind eyes asked about the storm. Alara described water rising and the understanding that letting go is not surrender. A fisherman testified he saw her pulled by current, then lifted by providence and drift. The clinic record testified she re-entered time with a cautious drum of pulse. The room listened without arguing. The magistrate signed a form that sounded like a bell, status restored, record corrected. The stamp landed and the room exhaled. Alara thanked officials as if thanking the lighthouse on clear days. She stepped outside and allowed the sun to write her name along her shoulders again. The square looked new, not changed. She had changed. She recognized which streets still lead toward breath. To celebrate, Enos brought small pastries and laughter that does not demand performance. Alara told the short version of the long story. Storms have concise morals: keep a vest, keep a friend, keep a promise. That night, Alara wrote a new page for the kitchen. 3 lines only. I choose restful pace. I finish smaller things. I answer messages after water. She taped it beside the light switch. In the weeks that followed, echoes appeared. An old memorial thread, a newsletter mention, a charity receipt. Each wave arrived and left. She stood and breathed, letting water be water again. She noticed the strangest grief, losing the permission to hurry. The town expected softness. She agreed. Softness is not weakness. It is accurate weather for recovery and trustworthy work. At the market, a man joked about miracles and paperwork. Alara smiled with calm eyes. Surviving once teaches you to change many small things rather than one grand thing that quickly burns out. Mateo called to confirm the final certificate printed correctly. He sounded quietly proud. Details aligned, commas where they belong, names spelled properly, reality updated to match breath and daylight. Alara walked to the office and picked it up. The paper felt ordinary and holy. A permission slip to participate in mail in mornings. She folded it and placed it near the kettle. She started a tiny ritual at the pier each Friday. A minute of stillness facing the channel where the storm decided. She thanked the water for mercy and memory. She thanked herself for staying. In time, she volunteered for the preparedness team. She taught the checklist that kept her steady. Water, whistle, neighbor phone, calm practice. The list looked practical and sounded like love. The child who drew the halo asked if she was really alive. Alara nodded and asked if the sun still crossed the square every afternoon. The child said yes. Then everything is working. Back home, she opened the box labeled later and made it kinder. She kept what fit the new rhythm and released the rest. Belongings behave better when not crowded by apologies and hurry. A letter arrived addressed to the estate of Alara Mora. She smiled. carried it to the registry, and watched Mateo's stamp redirected. Not deceased, forward with care. The ink declared reality without shouting. On a heavy evening, the memory of water returned with extra salt. Alara sat on the floor and counted breaths until the room joined her. Fear knocks loudly. Breath stays until the knocking tires. She called Enes and asked for tea and silence. Enes said of course. The teapot learned quickly. Water before story. Rest before meaning. They watched lamplight make patient rivers along the wall. Alara wrote a note and slid it into the mirror frame. You did not owe the storm your disappearance. You owe yourself the gentle maintenance of staying. The mirror agreed with a quiet shine. At the port office, she filed a final amendment to the incident report. It added one sentence, survivor present, learning, rebuilding. Sometimes the most important forms are one line and require years of practice. Her apartment turned into a school for attention. She placed a cot by the door for keys and kindness. A chair near the window for morning light and gratitude, limits where speed once lived. When news reached distant relatives, messages arrived carrying disbelief and relief braided together. Alara answered at a pace that respected breath. She refused to perform shock for anyone needing entertainment more than accuracy. Someone suggested a public celebration. Alara preferred a quiet ritual. She planted a small fig tree in the courtyard. Life that roots slowly offers the best fruit. Neighbors promised to water when she traveled. A month later, she walked into the registry with a basket of oranges. Mateo laughed that the system rarely receives produce. Alara said sometimes the correct stamp is thank you cut into eighths. The town gradually forgot the wrong record and remembered the right presence. People greet who they see, not what paper claims. Alara learned to greet herself first. Mornings answer best to the first greeting given. When tourists asked about the storm, locals pointed to better warnings. When tourists asked about miracles, locals pointed to the preparedness checklist and the fig tree lining the courtyard carefully through seasons. Alara visited the shoreline at low tide and collected nothing. Once she pocketed shells and explanations, now she left the shore as it was and carried home only the shape of relief along her shoulders. On a quiet afternoon, she unfolded the certificate and read it to the kettle. Then she folded it again and returned to chopping onions for soup that tasted like staying, simple, warm, sufficient. A friend from her old office asked about returning to the previous position. Alara chose a kinder schedule elsewhere. The paperwork of living should not outpace the practice of living. Balance belongs on calendars, too. Before sleep, she set a small alarm named Gentle Arrival, not earlier, kinder. Alarms can learn manners. Mornings can learn welcome. The body can learn trust again when no longer forced to sprint without destination. If your name was misplaced by a storm or a system or season, allow yourself to walk in any way. Bring water and patience. Bring a witness if needed. Bring breath. The door knows you. If you were declared finished by anything that forgot your heart, let this be your reinstatement notice. You can correct records. You can choose pace. You can plant a tree where a filing cabinet stood. Thank you for being here with my vessel of light. If this story kept you company tonight, like the video so the candle travels farther, subscribe to my vessel of light and tell me one word you want to reinstate. I will meet you here again soon with another quiet, bright story. Until then, may your returns be gentle. May your beginnings be steady, and may your paperwork finally agree with your breathing.